Scott Lauber will join us here, Philly.com, the Inquirer, the Daily News. Is the Phillies, is this the first domino to fall that they add a shortstop? Scott, the deal is pretty interesting. J.P. Crawford, Carlos Santana, and maybe some other stuff happening here if he waives his no-trade clause, which looks like is going to happen. But this is a pretty big deal.
Yeah, he has waived his no-trade clause. So my understanding is that is, if you want to say, the second to last step to finalizing the deal. What will make it final will be the official review of medical information. Typically, when you're dealing with a trade, it's just a review of records rather than an actual physical like you'd have with a free agency. But I don't know how that's going to shake out. But anyway, that's probably the last thing that would rubber stamp this deal, and it'll go down. And Jean Segura will be coming here to Philadelphia, J.P. Crawford, and it sounds like Carlos Santana going to Seattle. Probably one more piece headed here as well. But, I think you're right. It's a big deal. It is step one in what I think is a potentially transformative offseason for the Phillies. We've known for a while that they were going to play in free agency, and they are playing in free agency. They are involved with just about any free agent you talk to, whether it's Patrick Corbin, who they've already had in for a visit. Obviously, we've talked so much about Manny Machado and Bryce Harper. There are others, Michael Brantley. There are others that they've expressed interest in, Zach Britton, Andrew Miller. It doesn't matter. They've got a lot of money. They want to spend it. And so I think this is sort of step one in their offseason plan to kind of reshape their entire roster and build themselves a competitive team here. Now, in Segura, what they're getting is a guy who makes a lot of contact, really tough guy to strike out. I think he had the fourth lowest strikeout rate in the majors last year.
Yeah, we need that here.
That's a number, right, and that's a number that is very much on the radar of analytically minded people like the people in the Phillies front office. So that's a number that would stick out to them with Segura. He is an average to slightly above average, depending on who you talk to, shortstop, which, again, even average improvement is an improvement for the Phillies, who were the worst defensive team in baseball last year. He's a guy who can hit at the top of the order. He can steal some bases. And he's got 4 years and $57 million left on his contract, so he's going to be here a little while. So that's kind of the overview of Jean Segura and the guy they're getting and the first step in what they're trying to do.
So I saw you tweet out that it's not a home run that he plays shortstop. He has played some second base. I mean, because some people say, all right, you brought a shortstop in. What does that mean for Machado? So I guess there's a couple of options if they want to go down the Machado road.
Right. So I mentioned the fact that he played second base almost, majority of the year in 2016. He played second base. That happens to have been the best year of his career. Coincidence? I have no idea. But the point is he can play elsewhere besides just shortstop. So it doesn't necessarily, people might look at this deal and say, well, they just acquired a shortstop, that takes them out of Machado. Not necessarily. They can either talk Machado into playing third, which is by far his better position, or Segura can play second.
Does he know that?
He wants to play short.
Does Machado know that?
Well, whether or not he does, he prefers to play shortstop. But, I think any team that signs him, whether or not he's their shortstop this year, he's not going to be their shortstop for more than a couple of years of that deal. So he is an elite third baseman. He is a good shortstop, and if he really wants to play short, my point was you could slide Segura over to second, trade Cesar Hernandez, and make that work. Or preferably, you could talk Manning into playing third, keep Segura at shortstop, and you've overhauled the entire left side of your infield. So the point being that Manny Machado is not off the table just because Jean Segura is here.
Interesting you bring up Hernandez, and it's kind of a two-part question. How difficult you think it would be to just move, if not just have to dump it, which is fine. And then also, how does Scott Kingery play into this factor as well?
I think it's difficult to move Cesar, Cesar Hernandez, unless you're going to get far below, unless you're going to accept pennies on the dollar.
Do you think they're ready to accept that, Scott?
No, I don't. And I say this for a few reasons. Number one, the year he's coming off of, he did not have nearly as good a 2018 as his 2017 or 2016. So I feel like his value is lower just simply because of that. But also, the middle infield market's not real it's not really a seller's market right now. There are a lot of good middle infielders out there. You saw a very, very good second baseman in John Scope get non-tendered last week. He's a free agent now. There are a lot of teams that are well set at that position. So I don't think there are a ton of teams coming at you going, I'll take Cesar Hernandez. I want that guy. I need a second baseman. So unless the Phillies are willing to take less, and I don't think that they're willing to do that. So, to me, I think, the second part of your question was about Scott Kingery.
Correct.
And I think that they are very content to go into the next year with Kingery as a super utility, playing every day and playing multiple positions. And, kind of a Ben Zobrist type, kind of a Marwin Gonzalez type. Gabe Kapler loves those kind of players, and I think they see Scott Kingery as being a guy who could do that. So
you think he's down with that?
Down the road. What's that?
Do you think he's cool? He's cool with that moving forward?
Well, I think after the year he had, he wants to be in the big leagues next year. So I think he'll
take anything.
He'll do it. Yeah, I think I'll say this too. I think he realizes that he is a more valuable player to any team if he can play more than one position. So if they say, hey, go learn right field like they did last year, he'll go out and he'll take fly balls in right field. So I think he's very, very flexible and conducive to wanting to do that because he wants to have a long big league career for himself, and that's one way for him to do that.
Scott, obviously the people were looking at this deal and saying, how did Klintak get Seattle to take Santana? Is that a huge win for them?
I think it's a big win. I'd heard, like a lot of other people, that they were shopping him pretty heavily. I understand that the Colorado Rockies were very interested, but they didn't want to pick up all the money. It's nearly $40 million over the next 2 years. Hey, look, kudos to Carlos Santana and his agent for signing him early last year because if he had waited until January, February, he would have been Mike Moustakas or Logan Morrison, who took 1-year deals at lower money. He signed early and he got his money and he got a really good deal. But it just makes it more difficult for the Phillies to move him without picking up a lot of the money. And if this is a straight swap without money being exchanged, the Phillies get the $57 million owed to Segura, the Mariners get the $40 million owed to Santana, and they shake hands, then this is a huge win for the Phillies. It opens up first base for Rhys Hoskins, which is where he's more comfortable being, and they get a player in Segura back in return who can really help them at shortstop. So, I think that they probably wanted to unload Santana and not have to take on as much money, and it looks as though maybe they've done that here.
Scott, we care so much about the incoming player and what they think about playing here in Philadelphia and how familiar they are with the city, and I'm sure you saw the video that's gone viral now of Segura celebrating. And I don't know, outside of Cliff Lee in the last 10, 15 years, if we've seen a player more happy to be a part of the Phillies or at least out of his current situation. What did you make of the reaction, and what are you hearing as far as how happy he is to either get out or just play here?
Yeah, what we don't know about that video is whether that's happiness to leave Seattle or happiness to come to Philadelphia. You look around and last night in sort of reporting out what was going on with this, I mean, the big question was, well, has he waived his no-trade clause yet? Because if he doesn't waive it, if he hasn't been asked to waive it, it's a sign that the teams haven't agreed on the players. Because typically what happens is the teams agree on who's going where, and then they approach the guy with the no-trade clause and say, will you waive it? He gives his approval, and then you're further down the road to finalizing the deal. Normally the player doesn't get asked to waive it before the players in the trade have been agreed upon. So, I went to sleep last night knowing that he hadn't waived his no trade. And my understanding, though, was that was going to be a formality, that if it got to the point where they agreed on the players, they approached Segura and said, will you waive it? He was going to waive it because he's looked around and he's seen in the past few weeks they've traded Mike Zunino, James Paxton. His close friend Robinson Cano is going to the Mets. Edwin Diaz, who was one of the few players on Seattle who you thought they were going to keep and try to build around. It is everything must go in Seattle right now. They are overhauling their roster, and they're looking at not competing until 2020 or 2021, by which time, he's got 2 or 1 year left on his contract. So, there was no doubt in my mind he was gonna waive it to come here, whether he loved Philadelphia, hated Philadelphia, or knew nothing about Philadelphia. He was going to waive it to come here to get out of Seattle. So I saw that video and I had to laugh because I was like, is that happiness to be here or just thrilled to get out of Seattle given what's going on over there?
Oh, man, that's great.
Yeah,
Like
Scott Lauber's with us from Philly.com. Yeah. So, okay, they make this trade. It looks like it could be announced by the end of the day or get finished sometime soon. When do we see that big move happen? Do you think that is happening pre-Christmas, after the New Year? When do we see something big? Because people keep hearing big names, and they're starting to say, when's this going to happen? They're attached to everyone, as you kind of alluded to.
Yeah, I think there are three truly big names on this free agent market. One is Patrick Corbin. The other two, as we all know, are Manny Machado and Bryce Harper. Corbin, I think, is going to go first of the three. He's already made his recruiting visits to Philadelphia, New York, and Washington. That was all last week. I think he wants to finalize a deal before the winter meetings, which begin next Monday. I think he wants to get it done by then. So, I sort of felt like going into the weekend, just purely speculating here, he makes those three visits, takes the weekend, think about it, talk to his family, make a decision, and that we'd hear something early in the week that Patrick Corbin is headed to A, B, or C. I still think we're going to hear something from the Corbin camp this week on where he wants to go. Everyone's money is sort of on New York because he grew up in Syracuse and he grew up a Yankee fan and his family still roots for the Yankees and whatnot. And I do think that the Yankees are going to make a big offer for him. I think there's something to the idea that the Phillies might have to overspend in order to sway him away from New York. But ultimately, you don't usually see guys take a lot less money to go anywhere. They usually take the highest amount. So I think it's going to be one of these deals where he goes wherever the money is in one of those three places, if those are the three teams that are really the hottest on him. So I think Corbin goes first. I think the other two we may be in for a little bit of a wait. I could be wrong, but it is sort of Scott Boras's MO to keep his clients out as long as possible, build the market, build the interest, pit teams against one another, and get the most money. And that typically doesn't happen until later in December or even into January, sometimes even later than that. And the thing with Machado to remember is that, there's one free agent that he's sort of rivaling here in this market, and it's Harper. So if you're Machado, do you really want to go first and set the market, and then Harper can go above you, or do you want to sort of stare at the other guy and wait it out? And
right.
The agents are Scott Boras.
Yeah, we know that all too well. You make the offer. No, you make the offer. You make the offer. No, you make the offer. It's like somebody just got to step up and do it, right?
Right, and the agents are a big factor in this as well. They're Dan Lozano, who's Machado's rep, and Scott Boras are kind of rivals in this thing, and they both want to outdo one another as well. So my hunch is we could be in for a bit of a wait on those two guys, but the winter meetings are next week. Everyone gets under one roof in Vegas, and some things might happen. So there might be some moving and shaking next week. I do think we'll hear more. I do think we'll hear more than we have heard on those two guys. Their markets will crystallize a little bit more, and we'll know more about where the Phillies stand.
All right. Phillies reporter Scott Lauber, Philly.com, the Daily News, and you can check him out, the Inquirer, as well, as the Phillies getting busy. I'm sure you're keeping busy, Scott, and we appreciate your time as always, pal.
Thanks, Scott.
You bet. Anytime, guys.